with all in the way defeated, First Kindred Don Quixote is the last one left, and he won't go down without a fight. At the start of the battle against First Kindred Don Quixote, elder of the Manchaland family, they approached the windmill Ferris wheel that Don Quixote was trapped in. Sancho rejoined Dante's side, and the damned dozen was back. Don Quixote asked if that wheel didn't remind her of the old war. Sancho remembered the Bloodfiend War, specifically the bloodfiends of the family with many arms, like windmills. Don Quixote confirmed this. His heart beat as he stood against the giant folk in the field of battle. Sancho remembered running after him after one of them flung his body far away as a result of him underestimating their might. Don Quixote observed that now she no longer runs after him, she stands against him. He then summoned a gondola from the Ferris wheel, alarming Dante. They warned the others to either dodge or raise their guards, as the gondola crashed down on them. Coming out of it was blood bags and blood fiends. Don Quixote readied what remained of his forces for battle, which was whatever came out of the 8 gondolas that would drop down on the damned dozen. They would need to fight them, and also watch out for those that intended to self-destruct in order to try and take some of them with them. Don Quixote couldn't die in this fight, past a certain point. Or rather, Sancho couldn't. Well, at least as long as there was ally still alive. And when we get to phase 1, and this happens when there's no more gondolas to throw at the damned dozen, the Ferris wheel will cease to function, and the Manchaland sign on it would fall. So Don Quixote freed himself and removed not just the stakes, but also the cursed helm of Mambrino. He saw it as long as... well, it's been long since he set foot upon the ground, and Sancho questioned how he would remain ensnared to his responsibilities, even now, unable to flee. He was so free. And then he asked, where must he flee to? He tipped the scales in the endless Bloodfiend War. There was no coexistence to be found at its end. With blood, he created that place, yet no family had found happiness within it. He dreamed, yet it only wore him... well, it only led to him having a heart impaled by stakes and the fetid stench of blood. Shouting at Sancho to look at him. He is La Manchaland's Don Quixote. Now, to begin with, he starved and withered, which would lower his attack and defense, but next turn, that status disappears. This is also the case with the Golden Bow's forced arbitration. Yes. Each time, he shifts an attack pattern. Any status ailment he has will halve. He also has returning bloodlust that can upgrade itself if enough is there. He also heals 30% of damage if the target has bleed, but not with unclashable coins in an attack. He's also slowed if he feeds more than 50% of his maximum HP, and his offense levels go down by 2 and defense levels by 1, to a maximum of 6 offense and 3 defense. If there are any killed by him, Well, let's just say he primarily inflicts bleed and hits harder depending on how much is there. He can heal SP with one attack, and lose SP if the clash loses. He can inflict rupture, but that's less common. Returning bloodless can also increase the amount affected by one attack. Yes, a multi-target one. He's weak to Pierce, Wrath, Lust and Gluttony, but strong against Sloth and to a lesser extent Gloom. And when he's taken 1000 HP of cumulative damage, he will change his attack patterns. Yes, and at least when he's at 60% HP or lower, Phase 2 begins. On Phase 2, before that starts proper, Sancho told him that he never ran away, only having momentary lapses. Him, whose worse fate was cursed by that sickness, yet was still capable of love, even as his mind ailed from that suffocating, parching thirst. It's why he saved her life from the periphery of death, tried to share his love. And Don Quixote, in the past, asked why Sancho sought death. She told him that it was because she wanted to get away from the pain, and this was odd to him, asking, don't most humans inflict suffering onto others to be freed from their own? Sancho asked, how could hurting others help when her pain comes from the endless cold? Don Quixote asked where her family was, her siblings. Sancho told him that she never had anyone, not even on the day she was born. She's only known the cold, the loneliness. She wanted to burn herself to ashes as if she was never there. At this point, he offered to grant her the will to live. The family that he shall grant her will forever be by her side, asking her to come with him. She may know his name is Don Quixote, or Don Quixote, Don being a signifier of nobility. Sancho continued that it made her heart beat once again. And then she remembered the shepherd's village, where their adventure started. They'll have no assistance, blood fiend or not. It'll be just two of them against the world. She knew. Don Quixote knew that they'd encounter many knights on their journey. Many of them shall challenge them to a duel. She'll need to watch his back when the time came. Strike his foes with a heart that knew no fear. They must also abandon their identities as blood fiends as well. They need to appear and behave as humans do. Sancho understood that. And it's also why Rocinante had changed into a horse shape. Don Quixote considered him to have such a beautiful flowing mane of blood. Rocinante neighed, and if priest of La Manchaland Gregor's identity is any indication, this was made by much of Don Quixote's blood. He saw that Rocinante found this appearance unpleasant, unlike what it was. Sancho then asked if he even knew where the elusive tavern they were heading for was supposed to be. Don Quixote asked if that was not her responsibility. Sancho told him that she'd been holed up in that castle for about as long as he had, in any meaningful metric. How should she know? Don Quixote saw her as truly impossible. He'd not heard of a child that spoke in such an insolent manner to a higher kindred. Sancho asked if they were supposed to appear and behave as humans do. This was supposed to be an adventure after all. Don Quixote had overheard the travellers from earlier. They said that there was a cave in which a fearsome man-eating bear had made its home. Sancho questioned this. She could obliterate that poor animal in less than 3. Don Quixote didn't see any fun in that. They'll battle it like the battles in which the fixers from the books have struggled so valiantly. Sancho saw their adventure was full of amateurish mistakes and foolhardy confidence, but Don Quixote wanted to feast on bear meat as well, telling Sancho that she has to imagine, the look of shock on Dulcinea's face as they regale her with that tale. Sancho believed that she'd be more disgusted. That was when her heart beat more vibrantly than before. Don Quixote saw the night approach fast, yet they opened a path, cutting off the shadows. With the blessings and approval of their family, they would challenge and vanquish all that was perilous, and at least reach pure happiness. Or rather, at last reach pure happiness. Well, we know how that ended, don't we? His magnificence with his ingenious adventures of that day will shine. He was then talking to Bardi, who said that it was their adventure as well, who was instructing him on how fixers were at least 200 years before, asking if he remembered the words, that a fixer must maintain a head free of corruption, speech free of deceit, and conduct guided by clemency, to show courage in adventure and bear pain and suffering. Don't forget the mercy for the downtrodden. Don Quixote told her the last part. Pursue your dream, even if it means wagering your life in the pursuit of it. They'll return there to talk about it, no matter how many moons it takes. About all the adventures they've taken. Sancho, back in reality, said that even if she was to lose her mind, even if it's all just a fake steed running in circles in the carousel, she didn't want to stop. Don Quixote asked if that means she must struggle against an incurable disease, even if she must stand against her own blood, against him. He gives up on subtlety at this point and used a variety of heavy bleed-inflicting attacks. It's for this reason that the chain battle mechanic is there, as those who died can have others fill their slots. And having Egio that heals, like Honglu Soda and Faust's Fluid Sac, can help to keep up with the bleed-based damage, or at least slow it down long enough to cause some more damage before succumbing to it. But when he's at around 17.5% max HP, this is where it ends. He told her that she can stop galloping onward now. He raised his hand and summoned blood to rise. A blood bomb. Yeah. He's going full anime on them. He then threw it at his foes. Dante saw that the powerful deluge of blood ripped through the damned dozen like blades through paper. Only Dante and Sancho remained active. He then summoned a blood lance and considered it to be a shame. Sancho used to make him lances more graceful than this. Yet his held more than enough power to destroy Dante, a feeble timepiece. Dante saw a blood lance launched at them with inhuman strength. Dante saw that they were officially boned. They would not survive being hit by this. They averted their eyes from this impending doom. Well, not looking at it anyway, as not seeing that they had a chance to begin with. Thankfully, this wasn't part of their agenda that day, as Sancho held back the blood lance and Dante heard an upbeat, cheerful voice. She was unbroken and bold, unyielding before the First Kindred's insurmountable might, although this is considering that he was greatly injured from the fight that had been going on. Sancho asked if they were the one who decided the time for her to come to her senses. Hers was the same back when they saw always charging forward towards trouble that had come regardless of whether they wanted it or not. Whenever something interesting was happening, the troublemaker that always seemed small to them. At that point, her familiar and reassuring shadow felt much larger as she stood in front of them. So they called her the name that they thought that they'd never get another chance to repeat. Don Quixote. As for First Kindred Don Quixote, he saw it as unfortunate that she protected them with the back that once shielded him, but he's proud that she stopped his lance, asking her what will she do now. Her strength must be spent after such a mighty feat. She intends to fight. It's not over yet. Even if it's not by his hand, or not the day when her adventure ends, her sickness will drag her off her steed eventually. Her expression wasn't clear to Dante. Even still, Sancho was aware of this. To some, she was playing a character, though she might never reach her destination. She was incandescent to Dante, like a brilliant star twinkling in the night sky. She intended to persevere, to walk the journey of her own choosing, and continue that tale. Dante saw her brilliance, which compels them to reach out in hope. Then that shall be his dream. Dante saw that her star shall shine ever brighter. And resonating with the golden bar, this unlocks a new power of theirs. Superbia. Dante would light her path, telling her not to hesitate, to go walk that journey of her own choosing. She told Dante that she won't be long, armed with her partially damaged lance. She continued her fight with Don Quixote. Superbia is a sapling of light ability that allows a single EGO skill to be used without consuming any EGO resources, which Dante used to assist Sancho, which would reset any EGO skills already set up. She would use her own Zayn EGO, the Sangre de Sancho, for what was to come. And Don Quixote conceived of an idea most ingenious. And Sancho asked, what was it this time? Since they don't have a benevolent mediating force such as Barney to quell their quarrels, they're lacking a means of better mediation than one wrought by force. They would test their might in a duel with a singular bout of their lances. Sancho asked if there was no other way. Don Quixote didn't think so. That momentum, that responsibility of his to perpetuate the festival, to provide his family with what they yearn for, it can't be stopped. That carousel by the name of the Manchaland whirls too swiftly for him to dismount, even as it remains anchored in place. If she should shatter the burden of his nature, his responsibilities, that would prove her dream as stronger than the weight of his duty, wanting her to show the strength of his dream. Sancho saw him as ridiculously juvenile until the end. He told her that it adds colour to life, at least anywhere outside of District 20. He declared himself Quixote. Don Quixote declared upon his honor that lance he formed shall end that hollow juvenile dream. You mean what was once yours? Sancho declared her name. She declared upon her honor that her lance that she formed shall end his festering slothful dream. Then Don Quixote and Sancho charged at each other with spinning blood lances. The clash parted the clouds, revealing the full moon, overseeing this in Barley's place. Then we have one of the most pointless elements that Project Moon has ever implemented into a game. Button mashing. Quick time events. Where to force Don Quixote back, I had to bash the space button repeatedly. Good job it was forgiving, otherwise I would have failed the first attempt and had to start the fight from the beginning. Don Quixote had some strength left, despite his injuries, but Sancho made it clear that until she reached that dream, she would keep pushing to the... Then she kept clashing. Then after she pushed him back a little more, she told him that she'd gallop ever onwards, unbroken, unrelenting to the end. Don Quixote at this point ran out of strength and was beaten. Okay, with this part, am I the only one that was reminded of a certain pole dancing witch that angels and even the legions of heaven, and sometimes demons and the legions of hell that grow rebellious, are wary of? The dust had barely settled, and Sancho was revealed to be the victor of that duel. The shattered ruins of Don Quixote's sanguine lance was followed by the silver-haired Don Quixote descending. In front of him was Sancho, about to burst into tears. Don Quixote called Sancho Quixote, which confused Sancho. He told the valiant Don Quixote she spoke true. Her adventures will continue still. He grew more faint with each breath, his hand reaching out towards Sancho, trembling weakly. Death was near. He was weakened due to that previous battle, which was how Sancho, a second kindred, had any chance of defeating a first kindred. Yet his mournful voice sounded like it was coming from a happy dream. He told her to take his shoes with her on her adventure and one day tell him about it, no matter how long it took. To tell him how beautiful, how incandescent it was, the light of her dream, shining from the city's skies. At the end, he regained what he lost after 200 years of torture. Sancho saw that dream was both theirs. Don Quixote appeared at peace with this reply as his eyes closed softly upon that, as though drifting away into a gentle, pleasant dream. Sancho then told him that he may know her as Quixote, the righteous fixer of justice, Don Quixote. With that declaration, the lance that she'd so powerfully raised towards the heavens clattered to the ground. She then collapsed to the ground herself, saying that name, on her knees, weeping at the loss of her blood-fiend father. Red rain fell from the sky, enveloping her. Dante understood this to mean that Manchaland was falling apart. Sancho then carefully slipped her feet into Rocinante. They fit perfectly, as if they were made for her. She would regale him that in that adventure of hers, she was blessed with a family of 12. Together they braved and vanquished a number of foes, their wills as one, enactors of justice who never gave up hope. At least she's come to understand what he dreamed. So she set off on another adventure to seize that dream that twinkles so far above them. so she introduced herself to him again, her eyes no longer red as Rocinante once again allowed her to pass for human. She introduced herself as Quixote, or Don Quixote, Don as a signifier of her nobility, a fixer who shall sprint for the dream side by side with him. This time she didn't have her memory suppressed. She was willingly playing the role. Whether or not she'll break character in the future is unclear, but she joins the others for what's to come, perhaps with a few detours. But ultimately, it was clear to us that Honglu was next. They kept the cursed helm of Mambrino that the First Kindred Don Quixote was wearing as a souvenir. But something happened before they continued on their journey. Also, was it just me, or was Don Quixote leaning on the fourth wall during her outro song? As for what happened a little before they continued their journey, Cesara considered it a good job as she surveyed the decaying ruins of Manchaland, which are unlikely to stay vacant for long. Not only did they successfully destroy Manchaland, they also brought P-Corp the carcass of its founder. Clearly all they needed was to bring him back largely intact. Thankfully, they didn't need to bring him in alive. Virgilius paused for a moment and observed that she showed no wrath, no relief, or even a look of release. Does she feel nothing upon the demise of what caused the deaths of so many? She sees emotions such as hatred and resentment as emotions that only grow mouldy and stuffy, which eventually stand between them and their goals, or in shorter terms, she has a strong professional detachment. If she was to make a comparison, it's more like meeting the protagonist of a fairy tale that she once read as a child. Virgilius told her that he's sure that the family of his victims would be very pleased to hear her say that, likely not being that serious about saying that. Then she told him that 2 months before, when the Manchaland suddenly manifested there, she lost one of her closest relatives to it. Her family tried all kinds of methods to get them back. It was all pointless, until one day she saw footage of the Manchaland starting to manifest. Apparently there's an old tale about the singularity created by P-Corp's chief executive director. When she watched that video, she suddenly understood that their singularity was similar to La Manchaland. She didn't feel the need to explain that more. Virgilius found some amusement in this. She noted that the mission was accomplished. He had the golden bar, they should celebrate separately. Faust understood that while Don Quixote might believe that they're merely collecting First Kindred Don Quixote's remains, but Dante understood that they won't stop with just that. Faust saw that all further speculation was meaningless. If one day should Don Quixote realize this, she might come to resent all those involved in the process. Dante asked if they have to lie again. Faust told them that she'll take full responsibility for that. Dante asked themselves how much are they sacrificing for the golden bars. But they don't want to give up on that adventure yet. And Dante understood that, Don Quixote was remaining in character, with her memory restored. She didn't want them to regard her with such an expression. Dante didn't have an expression, never mind a face. She believed otherwise. She wanted them to smile. She saw this as all a merry dream. Dante saw that none thought about what awaited them at the end of their journey, while embarking on an adventure. The unknown future, twinkling so tantalizingly was what drew them to venture towards them. So they'll guess that they'll smile, like Don Quixote asked them to, with anticipation of what tomorrow holds. Oh yes, either combat training in the bus at best, or a nightmare scenario to deal with at worst. Smile and everything will be fine. What a big load of... Considering that she has her memory back, I think she's taking the... At this point, the minute hand on Dante's head moved, the doomsday clock moving ever closer to midnight. Whatever is coming for them, it's getting closer. But that's a little more ahead of time. They'll have more immediate threats to deal with. Sometime after everyone left, Sanson saw that as the end of the tale, in which they laid claim to another golden bar. Then we find out that he's affiliated with Demian. We saw it as an interesting tale, asking if they managed to tame the bar. Sanson said that they did. He looked forward to seeing what fruit steeped in so much struggle and bloodshed would bear, and at what cost. He intended to enjoy this play for a little longer, gazing into the far horizon, shining out light for the blinded, that he might turn them away from the seas that they mustn't seek. He'll spark the flame again and again should it go out, so that the fallen nebula's homeward journey to the star may not be veiled in shadows. Once that is over and done with, seeing that he'll also become a sovereign of the star, guided to his promised eternal respite. Demian understood that when the time came, they'll be able to find joy by looking up at the skies. For now, he'll wait for the sun to set into the gloaming before nightfall, waiting for the sheep one who fell from the skies will draw for him. Likely waiting for Dante to do that. Right, let's now talk about the source material. The ingenious gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha. The first book was published in 1605, the same year that in England the gunpowder plot was thwarted, and the second book was published in 1615, where Alonso Quijando, sorry if I butchered the pronunciation, yes, Alonso Quijando, a member of minor nobility, drove himself insane by reading too many books on chivalric romance and decided to revive this fantasy by making it reality in the service of Spain, becoming a knight-errant called Don Quixote de la Mancha, and recruits Sancho Panza, a farm labourer, as his squire, which could be seen as a promotion for him. In the game, Don Quixote makes Sancho into a blood fiend when it was established that she felt that she had nothing to live for, and it was after that that Don Quixote lost it with all the tales of fixers and decided to become one himself. It's also Sancho, who after drinking from Lefe went about as insane as him and became even more obsessed with fixers than he ever did, where originally she had the same wit as Sancho Panza in the source material. The source material Don Quixote also had a distorted perception of reality, seeing things as if he was living the stories that he's read about, where he saw noble ladies in a castle with its lord. They were actually prostitutes in an inn, and the lord is actually an innkeeper. Sancho, as Don Quixote, believed that she was Don Quixote, and that her perception of reality was what she believed it to be, such as what fixers were supposed to be rather than what they are. When the game said that he fell off his horse, metaphorically speaking, in the source material, he literally did that, as he charged at traders for questioning Dulcinea del Toboso's beauty, and then was beaten up by them. Rocinante was an old workhorse in the source material, while in the game, he was a blood construct of Don Quixote that now for the last 200 years took the form of some running shoes that suppressed Sancho's bloodthirst and allowed her to pass for human. Let's also talk about the overseers of the Manchaland. Dulcinea, in the source material, she was actually Alnosa Lorenza, one that worked in an abattoir or slaughterhouse that was skilled in the art of salting pork. She was considered by Don Quixote to be his lady love, Dulcinea del Toboso. In the game, she was the first of Don Quixote's blood fiend daughters, who had a sense of terminal vanity along with her disease and had no alternative identity. At least no indication of one. Now, Nicolina was a reference to Nicholas the Barber, where in the source material was male, and Coriambo the priest was a reference to a priest that was part of a plan to convince Don Quixote to go home and regain his senses. In the game, she was a deranged blood fiend that sewed the masks on those there to hide their unsightly appearances, and Coriambo still believed in peaceful coexistence between blood fiends and humans and felt the most guilt at stabbing Don Quixote in the front, to the point where he whipped himself in penance and tried, unsuccessfully, to kill himself. Now, in the source material, Don Quixote took the humiliation of inept governorship to shake himself towards sanity, at least briefly. And after a fever dream and a recovery, his sanity returned for good. In the game, it took 200 years of having stakes thrown into him. Yes, 200 years of pure agony to make him give up the idea of coexistence between humans and blood fiends. And Sancho was restored to sanity by removing Rocinante. The Knight of the White Moon in the source material was male, someone from Don Quixote's home who challenged Don Quixote to lay down his arms and stop his acts of chivalry for a year, in the hopes that he'd be cured of his insanity. This was actually an alternative identity of Sanson, intended to humour the madman, while in the game, the Knight of the White Moon is not Sanson, but in fact a mix of that role and it's also a reference to a Korean folktale, the tale of Princess Bai, where a princess searches for a magical spring that can heal her parents' illness, where she passed into the underworld to find the life-giving water, doing manual labour for years for the keeper of the spring. Now, it's unclear how Bari, Knight of the White Moon, was able to find, never mind drink from the river of immortality. But she was able to do so. The exact circumstances, in her case, remain unclear. It's up to the writers to determine when that will be revealed. Although I doubt it will be anytime soon. Either it's still in the swampy waters of the River Styx, as there was a river in that chapter, or they're at the fourth circle of hell, which is for the greedy. As Chapter 7 had a joust between Sancho and Don Quixote. Now, the main difference is, while in Divine Comedy, the avaricious or miserly used their weights to push each other with their chests, Don Quixote and Sancho used their lances. Then again, they could have also bypassed greed and moved straight to the third circle, gluttony. As while those in the third circle would be denied what they overindulged with in life, the blood fiends had an unbearable thirst for blood, an addiction. While they don't need it to survive, this addiction drives them insane if they don't have enough of it. This revealed a number of events in the distant past of the Project Moon universe. Firstly, the geography of the world appears to have shifted significantly, considering that in the outskirts there's a lighthouse that looks like it was built at a time when it was on the surface, where now it was buried. Secondly, a few events were mentioned. The machine purge, which is additional evidence of a mechanical uprising, as in what resulted in a law banning AI that was able to pass for human. Guglielmo the priest mentioned that it was implied that he was dying before he was granted the blood fiend disease by Dulcinea at the time that it was happening. And sometime after that, there was a war between humans and blood fiends, which was it was evenly matched. Until Bali, the Knight of the White Moon, was able to eventually persuade Don Quixote, the elder of the Manchaland blood fiends, to pick a side. He chose to side with the humans, who were eventually victorious. Sometime after that, Don Quixote created La Manchaland, intending to be a place of coexistence, but that peace didn't last, as while he and Sancho left for an adventure, the others rebelled against him. And when he returned, with the helm of Mambrino, Don Quixote was forced to seal La Manchaland away, but not before sending Sancho outside to adventure in his stead. 200 years later, after the Smoke War, the events of both Lobotomy Corporation, Library of Rowena, the Distortion Detective, and Leviathan, Virgilius recruited Sancho, who believed herself to be Don Quixote. Now that history is unclear, as in it's not known the exact timescale of this, but it's more clear than it was previously. Speaking of which, the River of Immortality. Barley likely drank out of that, as she's been delivering books and being the postal service for Sancho, or Don Quixote, or whatever you want to call her, for 200 years. Yes, 200 years, and she hasn't aged a day. And she was also remarkably similar to the one that killed Angela in her Pyrrhic victory ending in Library of Rowena, where Angela first killed Roland and then the others. Then she sat there, with overgrown hair, swallowing up many others as books for 10 years, before being killed by Barney. Yes, it's heavily implied that this woman that killed her was Barney, Knight of the White Moon. Yes, her attire may have changed, but it's certainly looking like it's her, isn't it? That same river that Jia Sichun was looking for, one near Lethe, the River of Oblivion. Yes, Barry definitely seems to be a fixer from a different age, an age when the self-serving, money-focused mentality that they have now wasn't so pronounced, which, based on her idea of what a fixer should be, a fixer must maintain a head clear of corruption, speech free of deceit, and conduct guided by clemency, to show courage in adventure and bear pain and suffering. Also, not to forget the mercy for the downtrodden. Lastly, to pursue their dream, even if it risks their lives. Ideas change with time and culture. What was unacceptable in the past might become acceptable after. The reverse can also be true. Yes, it must have been painful and disgusting to her, as she watched how fixers drifted far from the ideals that she was familiar with. She certainly wasn't doing what she did for Sancho for material gain. Certainly not for 200 years. In the present, Bari's kind of dedication is rare. One notable example is Kali, the Red Mist. As she could have fled the outskirts lab and left everyone to their fates. But she didn't. She fought to the death. It wasn't about money to her. She even supported those in need of money in her apartment block before she became the Red Mist. Even when it was confused for weakness. Barley was also one that Virgilius knew and directed him towards Sancho, although not mentioning her true name. As far as what P-Corp wants with Don Quixote is concerned, they might want to clone him, to bring him back, or worse, experiment with his blood fiend disease, while also working out how he did what he did, likely compressing space, seeing how what he did was similar to what P-Corp's singularity can do. A similar compression. A similar comparison was made by Dante's time inversion and T-Corp's singularity. Although they can only time invert within an enclosed space, which is why it worked for the Lobotomy Corporation for 10 years on the outside and 10,000 years for everyone else. Well, everyone else that's human, anyway. As far as Don Quixote, or rather the part that she's playing within the damned dozen is concerned, she'll likely take the shoes off whenever she feels a need to give up on being subtle, either as an identity or something plot-related. When she can't allow a situation to continue as it is. But for now, she'll keep Rocinante on to be able to pass for human. But with her true memories no longer suppressed, the others know that she's the oldest one there, and some, like Heathcliff, will likely be at least thinking, remind me not to mouth off at you anymore. As for where they're heading next, it's likely either District 8 or District 17. As those are east of District 16, and the east of the city is where Honglu came from. Unless they're taking a warp train to their next destination. Although I doubt that, as they'll only use that if there's a need to. As for Urtis, it's implied that she slaughtered quite a few innocents in the Smoke War. Or at some point in her life before she was a part of the damned dozen. That will likely come back in a conversation much later. Don Quixote won't like what P-Corp are likely to be doing to her father's corpse, and that will likely bite Faust in the rear at some point in the future. It might even blow up in P-Corp's face if they decide to clone the First Kindred, bringing him back to life essentially as he'd be brought back at full strength. As for Virgilius, I know that he's under contract and he can't get involved unless the damned dozen are all dead and Dante is in danger, or if he needs to discipline them, within reason. But what if he was unconstrained and can fight against an army of blood fiends with his EGO? An EGO that can control blood, allowing him to move into blood puddles to evade damage, as he did in the battle against Schadenfreude. along with forming it into sword constructs, and he can even create spears out of it and rain down on his enemies with them, like he did with the Wild Hunt that King Heathcliff manifested against them. He might even be able to control the blood inside of their bodies, slowing them down. Although the blood isn't useful if it's dried up. Now, the full limits of his EGO have yet to be explored, but it is focused around blood, much as Zhao is focused around fire. As she is fire, as Millie would put it. And Moses is focused around nicotine addiction. As for his eyes, either they were replacements taken from First Kindred, with all of the disease removed, or they're just augmentations that are widely available. I'm thinking most likely the latter. You know what? Why don't I do a Blood Fiend themed lore video? Until next time. Hail the rabbit!